it. I'm going to invite up our panelists. I'll be bringing them up one at a time. So come on stage when you hear your name. Let's start with Andrea Sáenz, who's the president and CEO of the Chicago Community Trust. Let's hear it for Andrea. It is one of the oldest and largest community foundations in the country that strengthens opportunities for all types of Chicagoans doing all sorts of wonderful things. Next up is Brad Henderson. Come up onto the stage, Brad. Brad's the CEO of P33. Originally, actually in the script, he was supposed to come first, but as a short person, I didn't want to sit next to Brad for an hour. But, you know, it's short people, strength in numbers here, you and me. Brad at P33 is an amazing organization, really is taking a leadership stance in global technology here in Chicago. A very exciting thing they're doing is really making Chicago a world-leading hub in quantum, which we're going to talk about in a little bit. So welcome, Brad. Next is Professor Joel Mokyr. So come on up to the stage. He's a professor of economics and history at Northwestern University. Now, a few months ago, you might have seen in the news that there was a Northwestern professor who won the Nobel Prize in economics. That was Joel. And so we're going to learn more about what he won it for and his views on the future. Next is my pal, Janice Jackson. Come on up, Janice. Janice is the executive director of education and society programs at the Aspen Institute. She's really a national thought leader on the topic of education. And if she looks familiar, she was the CEO of Chicago Public Schools for many years. That's right. And also the CEO of Hope Chicago. Okay, and then fifth is Phil Clement, the CEO of World Business Chicago. Let's hear it for Phil. World Business Chicago is a leading public-private partnership organization that really is leading the city's efforts in terms of economic growth and attracting great companies and instilling, just a really strong business community throughout the entire city. Phil is also the architect of Chicago 2050, which I like to think of it as the modern-day Burnham Plan, and it is really setting us on a great course for success, and we're going to learn more about what is in that plan this evening. So let's hear it for a whole panel. So I'm going to start with a crystal ball question. It's a crystal ball fill-in-the-blank question, actually. So here is the statement, and your job is to fill in the blank. In 2050, the innovation we will all depend on the most is fill in the blank. How about Phil? Fill in the blank? Oh, make sure all your mics are turned on.
There we go. All right, so this one's going to be tough, I think. Even as we were working on the 2050 strategy, economic strategy, we found the next 5 years a little easier to predict than the 20 years after that. So I'm going to go with resiliency.
Okay, resiliency.
Yes,
that's a good fill-in-the-blank word.
Our ability to respond, adjust, and embrace new plans is going to be super important in 2050.
Yep. What do you think, Janice?
Along those same lines, I would say humans and adaptability. I think it's easy to get super excited about all the technology, but at the end of the day, if you look back the past 50 years and compare all the technological advances, one thing remains true, that it is about humans and how we interact and respond to one another. So I think that will remain central even 25 years from now.
So what will depend on the most is ourselves. That's good to know. How about you, Joel?
For me, the key concept is what I call useful knowledge. Now, that doesn't mean that if you're a lawyer or a philosophy professor, your knowledge is useless. But this is something that in the 18th century, people refer to what we call science and technology. And for me, the key element is what I call feedback. That is to say, you have sort of two big blobs of knowledge. One of them is essentially technical knowledge, which is basically how to make things, the knowledge of how to do things. And the other is scientific knowledge, which is a description of the world. And the dynamics of the last quarter of a millennium, if I may take us back a long time, is that the two interact with each other all the time. But the degree of interaction has been getting stronger and stronger and stronger. So today the idea that scientists and engineers wouldn't talk to each other is absurd. In 1700, the idea that they would talk to each other would be absurd. We've come a long way since that. And the technological successes we've had are a consequence.
That's excellent. By the way, question for the people in the back. Could you hear Joel okay? Okay, so Joel, I like that you're very animated with your hands when you speak. The problem is sometimes your microphone is far away, so just make sure to hold it a little closer. But yes, thank you for that great insights. Brad?
People can hear me.
I feel like I wouldn't get invited back if I didn't say quantum. Mm-hmm. So I'm playing the part. But what I would say about why quantum I think will be so consequential. I mean, many of us have heard the joke that we were promised flying cars and teleportation, and we got cat videos and like 15 versions of email. Right, and I think the reality is a lot of technological development has been pretty disappointing. Some of it's marvelous, but a lot of it's been pretty disappointing. What I think is different about quantum computing is you're getting deep into the laws of chemistry and physics. And you're turning chemistry and physics into things we get to play around with and reinvent and reimagine. And so I just imagine a world in 2050 where the medicines we create, the materials we create, and there actually is a concept of teleportation in quantum. So maybe one day we can sit here and teleport somewhere, but I really do think that quantum by 2050 will have really changed the way we view the material world. It sort of lives into the promise of sci-fi, but actually really delivers.
Wow, very cool. We're going to do a deeper dive into quantum in just a little bit too. How about you, Andrea?
So at the risk of being boring and agreeing with too many of my fellow panelists, I will say it's, to me, the biggest thing we need to focus on is human resilience, but I'll put a little different context around it. Last week was the moment that I heard my first sort of AI scary presentation where it's clear to me that things will be changing more quickly. I mean, imagining even 5 months out from now is a little hard based on what I understand is happening in real time right now. So thinking about 2050 in the context of a technology that's now improving itself, changing to be what will likely be sort of superhuman intelligence, how do we maintain our connection with one another and the essence of what humans uniquely can do in this world and on this earth in that context? So it's human resilience, but with all of these complexities that I'm trying to grapple with.
Yep, I love that. We are not going anywhere, us humans. So next question I have, we're gonna do a little bit of time traveling this evening. We were just kind of in the year 2050. Let's take it back to now. Maybe now and looking at the next 10 years or so. What do you each think is the #1 global challenge that innovation must address over the next decade? And why don't we start? We'll go in reverse order.
I'll start. So, economic disparity getting worse and will likely become worse because of concentration of wealth. If we don't tackle that, we are really all in trouble. And we can use an innovation mind frame to tackle those problems, right? This is the classic, these are age-old problems. Lots of different things have been tried. We need to create an environment where we're bringing more thinkers into the camp that helps us solve that problem. We understand that innovation requires different perspectives and the ability to synthesize lots of different experiments in real time. That is the innovation that I think will allow us to be resilient as a human race and keep our societies intact with all of the things that are changing so quickly.
They like your answer. What do you think, Brad?
I would build on that. I think Andrea's words are wise. To me, it is fundamentally about starting with real problems in the real world. If we want to apply technology, we always talk about Chicago's, one of its unique strengths is it's a place where tech gets real. And so much of, and I'm an AI skeptic, so for what it's worth, and we're happy to talk more about that afterwards. I think so much of the technology that we read about in the paper is tech applied to tech, right? It's easy for Anthropic to do what they're doing by applying it to their own code or to Google's code or to Meta's code. It's another thing to have UL Solutions or Caterpillar or John Deere or a farm field really deploy that technology. And I just think that's the piece that gets lost. Like we're going to get so excited about all the hype, or so worried about the hype that we read in the paper, but miss the fact that we could walk into a hospital somewhere here in Chicago today and actually see a process that's probably less productive than what was before, less user-friendly than it was before. We've applied tons of technology to that problem, and it doesn't get any better or cheaper, et cetera. And so I just think a lot about, for the folks who are in the room here today who have an interest in being here because they like innovation and technology, if you're thinking about how to apply it to real problems to make things better, that feels like more energy and attention is required, and cat videos less.
Good point. And Professor Mokyr, what do you think is the top challenge that innovation needs to solve in the next decade? And be sure to hold your mic to your mouth there.
So here's my greatest concern about the foreseeable future, and that there's too many guys like me and too few guys like Brad. And what I mean by that, what I mean by that is just that I'm probably twice your age. And the real concern, and everybody knows about it, is that the age distribution of the population is getting worse, in the sense that we're not having lots of babies and we live much longer. And that is going to raise incredible economic problems that nobody quite knows how to solve, because there will be a shortage of labor across the board in the economy. The notion that new technology is going to throw us out of work and create these massive numbers of unemployed truck drivers, that is all nonsense. Forget all that. The real problem is not too many robots. The problem is going to be too few robots, a robot that can't replace us, because the only thing that will save us from this aging of the population are two things. One of them is immigration, which at the moment does not seem to be particularly popular in certain circles, shall I say. And the other is come up with machines that save labor. So labor-saving innovation is what we need, because what's happening is that as the population ages, and there are too many doddering old guys like me, you need workers to change our diapers. And you need workers to make sure that we take our pills. And it's very, very hard to find these workers, because nobody really stands in line to be the diaper changer in a nursing home. And so how are you going to solve that? And the answer is that with AI and combining AI with advanced robotics, we can now, in the foreseeable future, produce humanoid robots, who will able to replace the elderly care that so many of us need, and who will be able to produce the goods that fewer and fewer workers need to create in order to pay for the old people who no longer are working. And that is not a problem in the United States alone. It's a problem worldwide. It is worse in South Korea, it's worse in China, it's worse in Europe, and in Africa, even though they still have a birth surplus, there too, within 20 years, they're going to be in the same situation. It's something that we brought on ourselves, It is not, you can't blame anybody else. There are millions and millions and millions of people who made decisions how many babies to have and when to have them, and it's not something that the government can control or even should control. But we need to deal with it, because otherwise there will be a terrible crisis, and the crisis will show up not only in elderly who don't get care, huge government deficits, trying to pay the pensions of people, where there's fewer and fewer taxpayers, and on and on. And so the only thing that can save us from that is mechanization of things that currently seem to be done only by humans. We can do that because, the Japanese are already experimenting with robots, and it seems that the literature seems to suggest that old people actually, on the whole, respond well to this kind of caretakers. But it will take training, it will take adjusting, it will be a long and painful process. But I don't see any other way out.
Yeah, wow. I can see why he won the Nobel Prize in economics. Jeez.
Yeah.
Thank you, Joel.
Yep. I'll keep on that same theme. I think the mismatch between jobs that the future will call for and the talent to do those jobs is getting even more wider. And I think you talked a little bit about the age deficit or the age disparity. I think we should also talk about the demographic disparities as well. If we look out to 2050, the face of America will look a lot different. We're already seeing those changes, and those show up in a lot of the social and geopolitical issues, some of which you referenced in your comments. But I want to just stay on this topic because this is why I care so much about what happens in public education, not just here in Chicago, but nationally, is that when we start to talk about innovation and get super excited and riled up about it, we have to pay twice as much attention to who isn't a part of those conversations. So for example, I get super excited when I hear Brad and others talk about quantum and what's coming to Chicago and all of those opportunities. But then I immediately go to, so how will we pair that so that the people who in Chicago, in CPS, in the community where a lot of this innovation will reside, how will they be able to take advantage of that? We as a country and as I would even say globally, continue to get further and further apart. And so if we create all of these opportunities, I'm afraid that we won't have the workforce in order to sustain a lot of the new industry and new jobs that we're creating.
Okay, so I certainly agree with all of my panelists on the urgency of the topics that they brought up, but I will bring up one that has been a passion since the 70s, which is climate. And I'm reminded of when Joe Biden started in the White House, he had a panel on climate, and one of the guest speakers was a labor organizer from the UK. And she just simply said, look, I always talk about jobs, I always talk about labor, but there are no good jobs on a dead planet. And from a big picture perspective, I think that that's the kind of cautionary tale we need to be taking a look at. From a local perspective, there's about 400,000 jobs that need to move from what I would call dirty manufacturing or brown manufacturing, meaning they are reliant on non-clean sources of energy. And they need to move to green energy or we're gonna lose those jobs in our economy. And so there's an immediacy to that challenge and then obviously a long-term relevancy to the challenge.
Great, thank you, Phil. So climate, education, quantum, robots changing diapers, a lot of stuff for us to be thinking about. Thank you. Okay, we want to hear from you, the audience. So this event's a little interactive. We've got some polls. So how this works, no need to download an app. You just take out your phone, pull up your camera. We've got a QR code. And so we've got a question. We want to see what all of you think. And the question is, what do you think will be the most transformative driver of innovation over the next 25 years? And we've got 5 options for you. There's also other, in case you think we missed something. Is it artificial intelligence? It's in the news every day. And as you're saying, Andrea, that 5 months from now, you're terrified about something that's going to happen with it. Climate technology, Phil, building off what you just said. Biotechnology and health, humans, our well-being. Could it be space exploration? Maybe 2050, we've colonized Mars and the moon by then. Or is it education and human development, building off some of the things that Janice was saying? Or is it other? So let's see, we've got most of all the responses. No surprise, AI is big, but so is biotechnology and health, education and human development. We've got 6% of you are into space comic books, I can tell. Very cool. Fascinating. Okay, so this is the sentiment of the crowd. This is how we're feeling. So I've got another question as we're looking into the future. As you said, Brad, quantum, we can't talk about the future without talking about quantum. It seems like you can't talk about Chicago these days without talking about quantum. It's very exciting. So, looking at AI for a moment, some people are saying AI is creating jobs. Other people are saying we're losing jobs. But according to a report from P33, the Illinois Quantum and Microelectronics Park is expected to create thousands of jobs. So that's a big bright spot, and it's going to transform so many things. So my question to you is, what does the relationship between evolving technology and job opportunities look like in the years to come through the lens of what you're doing with quantum? And also, how do we all wrap our own minds around how we should be thinking about quantum in our organizations?
Okay, so a couple thoughts. Great question. The first is, what does quantum mean for computing and big picture for Chicago? And the way I think about it, and the reason why 8 or 9 years ago a group of people decided to put so much energy against this is this will be the third big era of computing innovation. The first one was the CPU. The CPU was actually invented in some part by a University of Illinois professor, but the silicon chip gave rise to Silicon Valley. The second big innovation was the GPU, artificial intelligence. Many professors actually in Illinois contributed to that. But like the CPU, we didn't have economic development the same scale here in Chicago. It happened in Silicon Valley. The GPU is NVIDIA. The first $4 trillion company, they're hiring people hand over fist, et cetera. And so each of these waves created two of the most iconic ideas around wealth and employment that we can possibly imagine, right? So the bet on quantum is that, well, why wouldn't that happen for the next technology, right? That technology will create everything from new software developers, new hardware engineers, new people in marketing, new people in sales, people who need to cut the grass, people who need to maintain security. I mean, it's just, if you go to Silicon Valley and compare it to what it looked like 50 years ago, that's what we're trying to do on the south side of Chicago. I think if you picture that as a possibility, you have to ask yourself, how do you make sure it happens? And if it happens, how do you make sure it's inclusive? And so how do you make sure it happens? We're starting to see signs of. One of the most preeminent companies in the world, Quantum, picked us. DARPA picked us. IBM picked us. We don't get to say that often in technologies of that size and scale and future orientation. So that part of the story seems like it's progressing. The question is, what about the piece where we all get jobs and everybody gets to have a house and everybody gets to have decent health care? That's the part that I think is totally possible, but it's up to us to make that happen. I think about our partners at the Community Trust, at United Way, at WBC, at Northwestern, in the education system, et cetera. If we're not all rallying now to think about the CPS curriculum, the City College certificate, et cetera, we're gonna miss it. We're gonna get the jobs, but it'll be people flying in from other places to have them. And I just can look at the jobs, the thousands you reference in front of us, which we know we need to hire from. 2/3 of those jobs do not require an advanced technical degree. So if 2/3 of those jobs don't require advanced technical degree, how do we get to act together now to live into that promise?
And also, just to be clear, they picked us because a lot of the work that you and P33 have been doing. So kudos to you, Brad. I want to go back to you, Professor Mokyr, for a moment. So you won the Nobel Prize for economics. Oh, look, there he is. There he is. So a very proud moment for Chicago, for Northwestern, for you. Here, we've got our audience here. They're curious. What would you say is the single most important thing, based on your research and what you won the Nobel Prize for, which, by the way, was focused on a theory of sustained economic growth? What's the single most important thing that you think we should be doing as a society to ensure that sustained economic growth is happening? And when you think about the institutions and the sectors that are here, what do they all need to do to work together to make that vision happen? So give us a few minutes of your thoughts on that, and just a reminder to hold the microphone close.
So, I keep changing my mind about this, so I may not agree with myself when I just get started, but here is the thing. If you look at major breakthroughs in the past, and I'm a historian, so I'm not very good at forecasting the future. I'm better at backcasting the past. You're much safer ground there. But here's the thing: in many cases in human history, we have defined problems in a precise way. We have to get this thing cracked, and then we concentrate our research effort and our development effort and our money, and we solve that problem. So something like, say, Project Manhattan, right? So somebody decided at some point, we're going to build this thing, and then they brought all these people together, and they built it, and no matter the cost. Something similar happened with COVID. When we had COVID, we were going to. Sorry.
All right, we're going to get you a necklace next time that the microphone will be strapped around.
I'll be good for now. But no, I'm serious now. When we were hit by COVID, there was a major effort to solve the problem, to come up with a vaccine. We had this group of people, part of them from government, part of them from private industry. We focused them together, and they got it solved. We have a vaccine against COVID that actually worked. Now, this goes back, ladies and gentlemen, hundreds and hundreds of years. There were, in the 18th century, Society had certain problems that they recognized and they focused on, and they solved them. How to pump water out of coal mines. This is a major issue if you live in England and you use a lot of coal. So the answer was the steam engine. How to get rid of, how to solve the problem of measuring longitude at sea. You know, if you're at sea and you can only measure latitude and not longitude, you're going to be in some measure of trouble, right? And so they were. A whole British flotilla, floundered in 1707. They said, we're going to solve this problem. And damn it, they did. And so it goes on and on and on. We have two major problems that we need to focus on. One I already mentioned, which is the aging of the population. The other, of course, is climate change. Climate change is not something in the future. It is not a threat. It is here. We all know it. The numbers don't lie. The real question is how costly it's going to be. And so in the past, economists have thought the cost would be, bearable, large numbers, but, 2-3% of GDP. Everybody thought, no, that's bad, but we'll adjust. New calculations show that these numbers are vastly understated, and that the total social cost of climate change, once you do it right and you calculate the global consequences, are going to be 6-fold higher than was previously suggested. This is a major breakthrough in the economics of climate change, but the number seems unassailable. What that means is we will have to focus on adapting to climate change at a rate that we didn't think was necessary. And that scares the bejesus out of me because we're not doing it. We're moving in the other direction. This is a major danger to us because once the effects of climate change are really going to hit us, it may become irreversible. And so what I really hope for is that we will come to some kind of an agreement between government and business and non-profits and universities that we need to harness all our strengths to tackle this existential threat to the human race, because that's what it is threatening to become. And standing there and calling it a hoax or calling it, something that we can deal with, and, what about jobs? What about this? Ladies and gentlemen, this is a real and present danger. And the only solution that we can come up with is coming up with technological means to adapt with it. Because the alternative, which is some kind of global agreement, cooperation, holding hands, singing kumbaya, it ain't gonna work, ladies and gentlemen. We need to come up with technical solutions. Now, there are many technical solutions, some of which are already active. Some of them, we know it would work, but they're fiendishly expensive, like carbon extraction from the atmosphere, geothermal things. The biggest hope, of course, that we all have is that one day we'll be able to crack nuclear fusion. If we crack nuclear fusion, then the energy problems that we have will be solved. Until then, we have to settle for things that are less ambitious, but more effective. Solar, wind, nuclear, and other energies that are non-pollutant. Because if we're not going to do that, we are doomed.
Yeah. Thank you, Joel. Yes. Well, innovation is all about problem solving, and it sounds like there's no bigger problem than what you just described. Let's do another audience poll. We want to hear from all of you again. We've got a different question. The question we have this time is related to skills of the future that we're going to need. So the question is, what skill will be most valuable for humans in an increasingly tech-driven world? Is it creativity? Could it be emotional intelligence, the ability to understand each other's emotions, what we're going through? Is it critical thinking and analysis? Is it collaboration, working together? It sounds like collaboration has to be a skill of the future to tackle these big issues. Is it adaptability and resilience? We've talked about that. Or perhaps it's technical literacy. In a tech-driven world, we all need to be technologists. Maybe that's where we're going. So let's see, we'll give it a little bit. Just maybe curious what our panelists think. If you were to pick one, Andrea, what would you choose?
I like adaptability. It feels like it's sort of a cheat. It can incorporate all the things, right? You adapt and you use the skill that's most needed. So when you need to be creative, you're creative. When you need to do something else, you're something else. So cheating, adaptability.
Yep. Well, we've got a neck and neck tie. Adaptability and critical thinking. I mean, the truth is, I think we need all these skills. But it's interesting seeing which ones are rising to the top. Well, great. You know what? Let's build on this question with something for you, Janice, because here you are, leader of education in America, thinking about what are the skills. I think you are.
We wish.
You know you are. All right. Well, the question is, if you want to become the most in-demand talent of the future, what type of education should a person pursue today? And building off of that is, how do you think we need to reimagine the way that we provide education today?
Wow.
Easy
I could do a
question.
whole lecture on that, but I'll try to sum it up. First, going back to the poll, I think critical thinking and digital literacy, I think was a phrase, are critically important, and something that I think a lot about, especially in the age of technology, where today kids or young people, all of us, are presented with way more information than any of us have ever experienced in our lifetime, which on the surface sounds like a good thing. More information means more learning, you're smarter. But in fact, I feel like people have less of an ability to do the type of critical thinking or have the right level of discernment around the information that's being presented to them. So when I think about the jobs of the future, I think we have to be careful about telling students to go into career fields. And I know in education, we've done that a lot. And a big part of that is out of a necessity, right? I think about one policy we had in CPS a few years ago around computer science, where we doubled and tripled down on that. And I think it was the right thing. I think there are some skills that students got out of that initiative around critical thinking, being able to think about logistics. All of those things matter. But we also saw technology like AI come in and wipe out the need for that. A lot of that coding and the things we prioritize, you can do now with, ChatGPT or another tool. And so I think some of the things that hold true and have always held true will continue to be important. Effective communication skills, I think oral and written communication skills will continue to be important. We talked about some of the largest technology companies in this country. If you go on their web pages and look it up right now, they're hiring for scientists and people who can code and do all this work, but they're also looking for effective communicators, because that's a huge gap. People are unable to make sense out of this and reach the masses. So when I listen to like what you're talking about today, this existential threat, these things matter. But the people who actually have the most power are the people who are able to communicate with the masses and encourage some type of action that changes the course that he's talking about. And those skills will become increasingly more valuable, in my opinion, in an age where people aren't generating new ideas on their own. They're not spending enough time inspecting ideas, arguing, debating with people, allowing for opposing viewpoints. And so if I were still sitting in the classroom today or making policy, which we'll try to influence policy, that's what we'll do at Aspen, it really is focusing around how do we embrace the technology, because I think education sometimes is slow to do that. How do we both embrace it, but also make sure that we continue to lean into the skills that I think will be important 100 or 200 years from now? And it's the ability to communicate and connect with people and influence people towards action that ultimately will save us. Because a lot of the stuff that you're talking about, if humans don't get their act together, we're going to be a part of our own undoing. So you need somebody who can actually communicate that and encourage people to move in different directions.
Yeah, love that. Love that vision. Thank you, Janice. So I know a lot of you are focused on this topic of skill building and workforce development. So just curious, any other thoughts from the panel, building on some of the things that Janice said?
Or things kids should be majoring in.
No, well, I think just to go back to our theme of resilience and adaptability, right now, so many of the models, as we talk to university systems, et cetera, about the workforce of the future, they'll say, well, look, we see some economic news, we understand what job is necessary. Then it takes us a couple years to develop a program and some curriculum, and then maybe 4 or 5 more years to get the first graduates out, and we're missing the ball. right? So the match, that important match at the end of it, is not working out. AI and some of the technologies that we've been talking about could give us better predictive abilities to train in advance of actually having the evidence of those pieces of the workforce. And I think we just have to understand it's going to be a much more fluid situation than it's ever been in the past, and that's why that notion of embracing change, agility, and innovation becomes pretty critical to our success.
Yep, that's great. Thank you, Phil. I saw Andrea nodding.
Yeah, I mean, I'll just add on the theme of not leaving people out and inclusion, leaning into the innovative approaches that are happening and really taking off in Chicago, but not at the scale that we need them to, that allow people to come into really good careers as an apprentice, for example, in a corporation. So you'd think of apprentices as, in Germany doing something in the trades. In Chicago, we have a lot of employers, United Airlines, Aon, that are bringing people in out of community colleges into career pathways that normally a 4-year degree from an elite university was the only ticket into, and having them grow inside the company. It doesn't answer the what is the tech change, but it does give us an opportunity, and it gives us some insights about how to make sure that we're leveraging the talent that is homegrown, the South and West Side kids that are going to CPS schools that aren't necessarily going to go to that elite 4-year university, but have in them innately the skills, the orientation, the brilliance that will turn those companies around and really transform them in the future. We're leaving those people out of our economy right now, and we have clues and pilots and small ways to bring them in. Those need to scale.
Yeah. Andrea, I want to stay on that topic for a little bit because I think it also connects very strongly to really what the Chicago Community Trust does, which is look out into the future. I mean, looking at current problems. There's some big problems that a lot of your donors are focused on. And actually, we have some of the foundations in the room. I saw the Richard L. Duchossois folks, the Coleman Foundation folks, the Joyce Foundation. I saw you in here too. So my question is, it relates to the idea that philanthropy really plays the long game, right? And sometimes it takes a lot of dollars and a lot of mobilizing of stuff to really make a dent and an impact. What would you say are the investments today that will matter the most in terms of achieving this inclusive economic prosperity that you're talking about?
Yeah, crystal ball question again. I'll just start by saying, philanthropic dollars get to be the risk capital, the innovation capital for social innovation, right? And we get to test ideas before and kick the tires and learn in a relatively low risk way that public dollars can't do, right? Because we need our taxpayer dollars to be used in ways that are proven. So just a quick example that I'll give is, about a decade ago, about 40 foundations got together and said gun violence in Chicago is unacceptably high, and we don't see a real solution at scale. They formed a partnership called the Partnership for Safe and Peaceful Communities to test these community, homegrown violence intervention approaches. Got, researchers from the University of Chicago to validate them, tweak them, et cetera. Now, a decade in, that is happening at a scale with public dollars invested alongside private dollars from corporations, from foundations, et cetera. And it's starting to make a real difference in neighborhoods in Chicago. Gun violence has gone down dramatically across the city, but most dramatically in those neighborhoods where these investments have been there for the long time. But as you say, it took a decade, right? And we're just starting to see it happen at a scale that feels different to people who live in those neighborhoods. And a decade is actually nothing when you think about the long game. So the kinds of things that we're thinking right now we need to be investing our kind of risk capital in are innovative ways to finance things like homeownership that we know bring economic stability to families over the long haul, right? The difference in the economic outlook for a family that is a homeowner and one that is a renter is huge. We have some broken things, tools, financing tools. People have a hard time imagining getting a mortgage, scraping together a down payment. We can tackle those problems creatively with the risk capital that is philanthropy, bringing along then opportunities for people to invest alongside our work. So these are some of the ideas that we think today, if we can fix the financing problem to get homes built more quickly and more efficiently and more economically, and get more people the kind of support they need to become homeowners, 20 years from now, 50 years from now, those neighborhoods, we're doing pilots in Humboldt Park and in Garfield Park, those neighborhoods will look incredibly different. They'll be more vibrant, right? Alongside that, we're also bringing all kinds of creative capital ideas to real estate development in neighborhoods where private capital has not flowed for decades. How can philanthropic capital alongside public capital prove that small, relatively modest investments create economic activity and circularity in those local economies that make the vibrancy, that make those neighborhoods stronger and more attractive and make those home values go up? So those are the kinds of things that today, we put the money in, we test ideas, we take the risk, we try to bring other people along. And 10 years from now, 20 years from now, 30 years from now, those communities and those families will be in better shape.
Andrea, thank you for sharing that, in particular with the Chicago Innovation crowd, because there's always a good number of successful Chicago entrepreneurs that come to these events, winners of the Chicago Innovation Awards, who sometimes are looking to get more involved civically, want to give back. I can think of one in particular from years ago, Pete Cadence, who was one of our winners, and then he went on to Green Thumb Industries. He took that company public, second largest cannabis company in the world, and he thought, what am I going to do with all this? Well, he started a great organization called Hope Chicago, and he hired Janice, and together, both of you have provided scholarships to thousands and thousands of high school seniors for, to go to college, and their parents as well. So, kind of to your point, there's people out here who it's good to hear the direction from you, where people can make an impact.
Happy to be a partner with all those people.
Yep, love it. The great work you do in Chicago kind of dovetails with the great work that you do in Chicago, Phil, with World Business Chicago. So if you're trying to get from A to B, or let's say maybe A to Z, and A is 2026 and Z is 2050, you need a plan to get there. Well, the good news is Phil made a plan. It's called Chicago 2050, with some other people too. But Phil is the architect of it at World Business Chicago and did some tremendous research, and I enjoyed being a part of one of the committees early on with all that stuff. Can you tell this audience, what does the plan entail, and what are the intended outcomes?
Sure. First of all, I've been at World Business Chicago now it's getting close to 2 years. But over the history of this organization, I've been here as an entrepreneur who had recently brought a company public and as the CMO of 2 very large corporations, et cetera. And I never had the chance or the luxury to really dig into Chicago's story and base case economics. And we read a lot of things, and it's hard to know exactly what the truth is. And within about 3 months, I realized that Chicago's fundamentals are actually pretty good. But there was a big gap between the narrative, what people believed, and the fact base. So we started to say, well, boy, if this trend continues in about 2 years, we might be talking about a renaissance in Chicago. And sure enough, right now, I can jokingly say, from presidents to popes, everything dope is coming from Chicago, right? And we're actually in a good spot. We're the #1 place for corporate relocations. If you look at the equation of the people we have here, the affordability of places, I call this the 3 Ps, and power. People consistently want to come here, they can grow here, et cetera. So our plan brought together probably 500 different executives, actually 300 one day at Wrigley Field in discussions, and a lot of the folks that are on this stage and in the audience were involved, and Brad had a significant piece in one of our hypotheses. But basically, we did some things in economic development that are not surprising. We picked 6 industries that are going to grow fast, where Chicago has a right to win because we're already in the top 3. They provide job density, good jobs for Chicago with high wages. Then we said, let's do some new things. And one of that was a category called big bets, which literally came copy-paste from Brad and P33. And those two big bets are quantum and clean energy. So we think if we pursue those, it'll help our region a great deal. We created another industry that was not really a category yet, which is called vibrancy. And if you think about things like theater and TV and marketing and advertising and fine arts, what you find is those ecosystems are really connected. People generally are in one, but they have to go to the other to make a living, et cetera. So we felt from an ecosystem perspective, that was another one that was well worth investing in and super important for driving population and attraction. So you add all that up together, we've got these focus areas, and then we have 10 recommendations that we need to apply to each of those areas. So it's a total of 8 times 10, and then a lot of initiatives. But if the best news is, well within our grasp, is certainly the continuation of being one of the top 3 economies in the U.S., which means we're in the top 20 in the world, right? We're already an economy larger than Sweden, just to put it in perspective. And if we continue along these plans where it's a managed outcome, we are talking about being one of the top 20 economies in the world with a $1.4 trillion base. And there's no reason we couldn't achieve it. So like you say, we have to have a plan, and now it's time to bring the plan into action. We've got probably about half of the initiatives underway that we plan to have underway, but much like safety and quantum, there was a theory at one time on some of these issues that nobody cared, there were no good ideas, and you couldn't do anything about it. And we find out the exact opposite's true. Everybody cares. There's lots of good ideas. And you know what? People are willing to put some muscle into it. And so we think that the Chicago economy will be exactly the same.
Yep. Gotcha. Thank you, Phil. If I'm not mistaken, this plan is public. It can be read on your website, and you should all read it because people can be a part of the plan.
Yes. And I will do a plug. Most plans are not really meant to be read, but this one is. It's actually a little entertaining. There's some great stories, and I think theory needs to be brought to life with stories, and we've gone through Chicago history, and we've got some good examples.
Yep.
Enjoy it.
And I think a lot of people would argue that if it wasn't for the Burnham plan, Chicago wouldn't be where it is today. So plans matter. Next question I have, going back in history for a moment, building off of Burnham being back in time, what are some historical lessons that you think we should reflect on as we embark on the next 25 years? And I think, Professor Mokyr, I'll have you as the closer because no one wants to follow the Nobel winning historian on a question about historical lessons we should reflect on. So we're going to end with you. And I know you'll take us to the year 1701 or something. The rest of us don't have to go that far back if you don't want to. Maybe the year 1871, there's a lesson there. But other panelists, starting with you first, maybe Andrea, what's something that's in the past that we could learn on as we look to the future?
Is this on? Okay. I would say, to build on a theme that we've been talking about, what we've seen in our work in just the last few years is the reason there's been real positive momentum on some of these investments in economic development in neighborhoods, et cetera, is because they are being built with leadership from the people who live in those communities, right? So the thing to learn from the past is not to repeat the exclusive ways in which our societies have made decisions about resource allocation, about public plans or whatever. So let's learn to be more inclusive because that really does make a difference, bringing those voices to the table.
That's great. Brad?
Well, I'm feeling very nostalgic. So I'll start with just happy 25th, Luke, to you and Tom, and the great work that you do. And yeah, just incredible. And in the spirit of nostalgia, I have to mention my wife will be very happy. 21 years ago, my wife and I got married in this room. So I need to take a picture. So that's history.
I've been told from Andrea that you're a good dancer, by the way.
Right there. That's right. I am a dancer. It take up a lot of room, big legs. They move around a lot. But is that the after party? Is there an after party?
Absolutely. You can start it.
That's all right. But the one quick observation I would share, and it's really getting back to, and I feel like there's a little broken record to this, the promise of quantum. I think the history is really important there. What did we learn with the U.S. steel mill that was there? And there were a lot of tough lessons around environmental degradation and around some issues around inequality and inclusion. And people moved from all over the United States to come to that particular piece of land to have real opportunity and a real sense of home ownership and economic mobility, et cetera. And part of my motivation for that project is my grandma and grandpa found prosperity working in a steel mill. My dad paid his way through college in a steel mill. And so I bring that up because that site, I think, has the potential to be reinvented, to first deliver on what it was originally intended to do, which is to give people opportunity, but to Andrea's point, to do it in a way where we learn from the past and don't make the same mistakes again. And so in terms of what I want to learn, how do we make the U.S. Steel site the future of what the economy of the United States should look like?
Yeah, well, it's very exciting, the potential there. Phil, how about you? What's a historical lesson that comes to mind when you think about the future?
Great. So I jokingly mentioned from presidents to popes, everything dope. And I think, though, if I extrapolate that, Chicago has a message right now that is about hope. And it is about welcoming, and it is about meaning, and it is about academic partnerships with civic partnerships, et cetera. And, as I look forward to that future, I say that I really hope the Chicago model wins. Globally, there's a lot of different models out there right now. And if I were to, look in that crystal ball, I would say, I really hope the Chicago model wins. And I'm going to give my colleague Brad a lot of credit here and make it really practical. On quantum, he was out there fishing for this idea and found it and mobilized a lot of folks in Chicago. And, we needed a president at the time to say, and a country and a military system to say, if quantum's gonna be that important, we're gonna win. And then we needed a governor who said, you know what, we're gonna win it in Illinois. And then we needed a Cook County president who said, you know what, I want it in Cook County. And we had a mayor who said, I want it in Chicago. And we had aldermen that said, the U.S. Steel site is exactly where this thing should be. Then we had neighborhood people who said, you know what, I want jobs in our neighborhood. Let's figure out how we can train and bring people together. And that is the model that has been replicated since the Burnham Plan in Chicago that we can be really proud of, is that when we take a big challenge, we come together and we accomplish those things. And so, I hope that Chicago model keeps winning.
Love it. Well,
cheers.
Thank you, Phil.
Yeah. This is making me think about a few things. I actually planned to say something different, but after listening, something else is coming to mind for me. And I think the lesson is not so much a lesson learned, but a lesson about what's possible. And as I listen to the plans that we are laying and the optimism and the hope that we see in our future, I go back to the point I made earlier about the fact that without the right workforce pipeline, this all falls apart. The sustainability piece isn't there. And the lesson that I would point to, and this may, you mentioned Hope Chicago, it made me think about when we were out raising money around this idea of opening up access to college for students, largely who people won't say it out loud, but people thought was a bad investment. Students from South and the West Side, open enrollment neighborhood high schools, students who had a GPA or an SAT score lower than the national average. Most people or conventional wisdom would say that's not the right bet. We made that bet, as you said, and it reminded me of something that the United States did at the turn of the 20th century. Most people don't remember the structure of our current schooling system is still very new. At the turn of the 20th century, less than 10% of people had a high school diploma. America was emerging as a superpower at that time and knew that they needed a more educated populace in order to secure the position of a global superpower. We're living during a time where that is being threatened, not only because of our foreign policy posture and a whole bunch of other things we haven't talked about tonight, but it's also being threatened because we're not educating our populace at the same rate to keep up and solidify that global positioning. So the thing that I would say is that while we're making all these economic investments, we have to be serious about investing in the education of our students, not once they prove they're brilliant despite all of the nasty circumstances they have to grow up within, but how do we start from birth through that entire process so that they can take advantage of these opportunities? If we don't think about some of those policies that we enacted around making school open for all, removing barriers, that needs to now extend beyond 12th grade. We need to pay for that and not make people, give up a limb in order to have access to those opportunities. Until we're serious about that as a country and stop relying on this competitiveness, we're gonna end up competing our way into position number 2, 3, 4, 5 in the next 25 years. And so that's the message that's resonating for me. And I do believe that Chicago is a place, because I won't give a history lesson on that, but so many things and so many times in history when we have pushed on systems that didn't work, that strength, that power, that resistance came from this city. And I'm hoping that whatever that educational and economic revolution is, that it comes from Chicago. And I believe we have the ecosystem here to do it. And I'm glad that you all came here tonight to listen to messages like this. I'm glad that that Luke and Tom and the team put this together. We're celebrating 25 years of innovation. And I hope when we look back in 25 years, we talk about engagements like this where we decided to really get serious about educating our young people. Otherwise, we're going to be looking at them in 2050, knowing that we gave up and that we didn't do everything within our power to shore up their future.
Thank you, Janice. Well, if that's not the inspiring spark to make the future happen, I don't know what is. So thank you, Janice. So we've got a couple minutes left. Let's end with you, Joel. So same question. It's not so often you get to ask a Nobel Prize-winning historian what's a historical lesson that we all need to be thinking about to ensure that we're set up for success in the future. What comes to mind? Ancient Rome, where would you like to take us?
I was just startled to hear that Chicago has a higher product than Sweden. And I would stand up for the Swedes anytime, as of last fall, but that's a different story. But I want to make a serious point about innovation and how to bring it about and how it can help us determine our future. One of the things that really is underrated is that not only that we need resilience and that we need adaptability, but we also need persistence. And there are certain problems in human society and in human life that are just hard for any society to solve. And they keep at it, and they keep at it more, and eventually they crack it. So here's an example that will resonate with all of you, and that's the history of electricity. Now, I'm going to sketch this out in very crude lines, but basically by the closing decades of the 18th century, everybody understood the incredible power of electricity. And the great Benjamin Franklin actually wrote a book about its potential, predicting more or less what electricity was going to end up doing. And then, almost a century passed. And nobody could do it, So people played around with it and little experimental things. And Michael Faraday, built a proto-generator. But, we still were dependent on gas lighting and on burning coal and all these things. And then, more than a century after Benjamin Franklin wrote that, we cracked it. We knew it was possible. We knew the physics was capable, but we couldn't do it. And then, at some point in the late 1860s, early 1870s, we did it. And then after that happened, of course, you get Westinghouse, you get Tesla, you get Edison, you get the sort of standard story we all learned in high school. But you're not told that for 100 years, people tried it and couldn't do it. And yet they persevered. And that perseverance was really critical. And I think the same is true today for problems that bedevil us and that we seem to be really hard. Fusion is one of them that I mentioned. The aging of the cognitive system, Alzheimer and related diseases is another one. These are really hard problems. We're dealing with incredibly complex issues, okay? But if we persevere and we get better and better tools to attack it, things like AI, maybe, your quantum computers, maybe other things that we don't even know about, but eventually we'll crack it. And if there's any town that I know of that has this perseverance, it's Chicago, because golly knows,
If we can make it through minus 28 degrees, we can persist.
The damn town burned down, and we rebuilt it. We came back stronger, and because we have persistence in the city. And, don't forget, the first time that the nuclear chain reaction took place was right here in Chicago with the great Enrico Fermi. We will produce another Fermi. We will produce 10 more Fermis, but we have to let them in.
Love it. Thank you, Joel. What a great note to end on. Phil, I think you need to take Joel on the road when you do all these, trade missions you're doing in other cities. That was fantastic. Thank you. Absolutely. Yes, we got great video, but all of you are the lucky ones that got to experience it in person. So in closing, I just want to first and foremost thank Andrea and Brad, Joel, Janice, and Phil for being excellent panelists this evening. And even more so than that, thank you for all that you are each doing to create the future. A lot of people experience the future. You're creating the future for a lot of people, so thank you. To the rest of you, the future starts now, right? The future begins this moment. So what better way to embark on this journey than to do it together? But the only way to do it together is you kind of got to know who everyone is in this room. So that's why for the next 45 to an hour, we've got the bars, food. Please meet each other. You can meet each other the old-fashioned way, which is shaking hands and introducing yourselves. But we also have some technology that can help too. There's an app for that. So this was created by one of our mentees in one of Chicago Innovation's mentoring programs, a great student from Illinois Tech named Nana. Nana, raise your hand. Where are you? Up top? Oh, there he is, up top. Love it. So how this works, no app needed. Just you can take a photo. It asks you a couple of short questions, and then it'll suggest people for you to meet. So I want to, again, thank all of you for being here, our panelists. If you enjoy the topic of innovation, we have no shortage of innovation programming this year, part of our 25th anniversary, and we hope to see you a lot. Thank you all.